I'm Caitlin Miller, 34, and last year I finally achieved my dream of buying a vacation home in Lake Tahoe. After years of careful investing, I was beyond proud of the sanctuary I'd earned through hard work. That is, until I arrived one weekend to find my brother Jake had turned it into a disaster zone. My parents' response? "He's just young, you can afford it." They had no idea what was coming next. Before I dive into this wild family drama, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button to join me for more real-life stories about setting boundaries with family. I've always been the responsible one in my family. While some people inherit wealth or get handed opportunities, I built everything from scratch. After graduating high school, I put myself through college working 2 jobs, sometimes sleeping only 4 hours a night between shifts and classes. My parents helped when they could, but with 4 kids and modest incomes as a teacher and postal worker, there wasn't much to spare. I never resented this reality. It taught me self-reliance and the value of hard work. After college, I started in entry-level real estate, making cold calls and showing properties in the rain. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with furniture I'd found on curbs, saving every penny I could. By 28, I had saved enough for a down payment on my first investment property, a small duplex that needed serious work. I renovated it myself on weekends, learning plumbing and basic electrical work from YouTube tutorials. That property led to another, then another. By 34, I had built a modest but successful portfolio of rental properties and finally felt secure enough to pursue my personal dream, a vacation home in Lake Tahoe. Finding the perfect place took months. I finally discovered a 3-bedroom cabin with a gorgeous view of the lake, needing just enough work to bring down the price, but not so much that it would be overwhelming. I negotiated hard and closed the deal last spring. The renovation took another 3 months, but by summer, my sanctuary was ready, complete with custom furniture I'd carefully selected, family photos spanning generations, and a collection of artwork from local artists I'd been gathering for years. This wasn't just any vacation home. It represented everything I'd worked for, tangible proof that a girl from a middle-class background could create something beautiful through dedication and persistence. I even had a small boat dock installed where I planned to eventually keep a sailboat, another dream for another year. My relationship with my family has always been loving but complicated. My parents, Martha and Richard, are good people with traditional values. They believe in family above all else, which usually means overlooking faults and forgiving without question. This philosophy worked reasonably well for our family, except when it came to my younger brother Jake. Jake is 29 now, but you wouldn't know it from his behavior. While I was working through college, he dropped out after 3 semesters. While I was saving for my future, he was blowing through jobs and relationships with equal carelessness. When I bought my first property, he was moving back into our parents' basement after his 3rd eviction. It's not that Jake is a bad person. He can be charming, funny, and occasionally generous. But he's never faced real consequences for his actions. If he loses a job, our parents help with rent. If he damages someone's property, they pay for repairs. If he needs a car, they co-sign the loan he'll inevitably default on. The pattern has continued for over a decade with no signs of changing. Despite our differences, I've always tried to be generous with my family. When my sister Allison needed help with a down payment on her first home, I loaned her the money. When my oldest brother Todd needed surgery his insurance wouldn't fully cover, I helped with the bills. And when my parents wanted to celebrate their 40th anniversary, I offered them my Lake Tahoe home for a week. They were thrilled about staying at the lake house and mentioned that Jake had been job hunting in the area. They asked if he could stay at the house for a few days while they were there to network and get back on his feet. I hesitated. Jake had a history of being careless with other people's possessions. Just the previous year, he had borrowed my SUV for a weekend and returned it with a mysterious dent and empty tank. No explanation, no offer to pay for repairs. "I don't know, Mom," I said during our phone call. Jake doesn't exactly have the best track record with other people's things. Oh, Caitlin, he's really trying to turn things around this time, my mother insisted. He's got some promising interviews lined up in Tahoe. This could be his fresh start. My father chimed in, we'll be there with him the whole time. What could possibly happen? Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wrote up a detailed list of house rules. No parties, no smoking inside, no more than 4 people in the hot tub at once, careful use of the antique dining table, and absolutely no borrowing of the kayaks without proper experience. I emailed this list to my parents and Jake, along with instructions for the security system and information about where to find the emergency contact list for local services. Jake replied with a thumbs-up emoji. My parents assured me everything would be fine. I should have known better. 2 weeks later, I was wrapping up a stressful period at work. A major development deal had consumed my days and nights, leaving me exhausted but satisfied. With the contracts finally signed, I decided to reward myself with a quiet weekend at my Lake Tahoe home. My parents had left 3 days earlier, but according to our agreement, Jake was supposed to check out that morning. The 3-hour drive from San Francisco was exactly what I needed to decompress. As I wound along the mountain roads, I could feel the tension leaving my shoulders. The afternoon sun sparkled on the lake, and I imagined myself sitting on the deck with a glass of wine, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. That peaceful image shattered the moment I turned onto my street. There were cars everywhere, at least 6 vehicles I didn't recognize parked haphazardly in my driveway and spilling onto the lawn. My carefully landscaped garden beds were trampled, with red plastic cups scattered across the yard. What the hell? I muttered, pulling in behind a beat-up Jeep that was blocking my usual parking spot. As I approached the house, the bass from blaring music vibrated through the walls. Through the large front windows, I could see people moving around inside. A lot of people. My stomach tightened into a knot. Using my key, I entered through the side door that led into the kitchen. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. Every surface was covered with empty bottles, food containers, and spills. The custom tile backsplash I'd had installed was splattered with what looked like marinara sauce. Someone had apparently tried to make flaming shots on my quartz countertop, leaving black scorch marks in several places. A group of strangers stood around my kitchen island, mixing drinks and laughing loudly. They barely glanced at me as I walked in, apparently assuming I was just another partygoer. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely audible over the music. No one heard me. I moved to the sound system and shut it off, prompting immediate protests. "Who killed the music?" a guy in board shorts demanded. "I did," I replied, feeling my professional composure rapidly disintegrating. "I'm the owner of this house. Who are you people and where's Jake?" A young woman with a beer in her hand pointed toward the back deck. "Jake's out by the hot tub." Navigating through the crowded living room was like walking through a nightmare in slow motion. My beautiful gray sectional sofa was stained with what smelled like tequila. Someone had used my vintage coffee table as an ashtray. The custom bookshelf that had taken a local craftsman 2 months to build was now missing several shelves, with books scattered across the floor. I stepped onto the deck and found Jake lounging in the hot tub with 4 women and 3 men. Empty beer bottles lined the railing. My heart nearly stopped when I saw one of the men standing on the edge of the hot tub, preparing to jump. "Stop!" I shouted. "Get out of there right now." Jake looked up, surprise briefly crossing his face before he broke into a grin. "Caitlin, what are you doing here? You should have told me you were coming. We would have saved you some pizza." The casual tone of his voice in the face of such destruction sent a wave of fury through me. "What am I doing here? This is my house, Jake. You were supposed to be gone this morning. What the hell is going on?" He waved dismissively. "Mom and Dad left a few days ago, but they said I could stay a bit longer. I ran into some friends, and we decided to have a small get-together." "Small?" I gestured to the house full of strangers. "There must be 30 people in there. And look at this place. It's completely trashed. Jake rolled his eyes and climbed out of the hot tub, water cascading onto the deck. Chill out. It's just stuff. You're loaded anyway. We'll clean up before we leave. I looked at the friends in my hot tub who were now watching us with mild curiosity but making no move to leave. One of them actually reached for a fresh beer from the cooler beside them. Everyone needs to leave, I announced. Now. The party is over. Come on, Caitlin. Don't be such a buzzkill, Jake protested. It's only 7 o'clock. I don't care what time it is. This is my property, and I want everyone out in the next 15 minutes. Jake's expression hardened. Fine. Whatever. We'll go to Ryan's place. He turned to his friends. Party's moving, guys. The fun police have arrived. As Jake's friends grudgingly climbed out of the hot tub and shuffled inside to spread the word, I surveyed the damage to the deck. The beautiful outdoor furniture set I'd special ordered from a sustainable forestry company was soaked and stained. Someone had extinguished cigarettes on the wooden railing, leaving burn marks. A broken wine glass glittered in dangerous shards near the steps. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures of the destruction. I moved methodically through the house, documenting everything while Jake's friends collected their belongings and filtered out. In the guest bathroom, someone had apparently missed the toilet entirely. The hallway wall had a human-sized hole in it, as if someone had been pushed or had fallen through it. In my bedroom, which should have been off-limits, drawers had been rummaged through, and a bottle of my perfume had been spilled across the dresser, ruining the finish. But the worst discovery came in the living room. The framed photograph of my grandparents on their wedding day, one of the few family heirlooms I possessed, had been knocked from the wall. The frame was broken, and someone had stepped on the glass, tearing through the irreplaceable photo. I held the damaged picture in my hands, fighting back tears of rage and grief when Jake appeared in the doorway. Everyone's heading out, he announced. See? No big deal. I looked up at him, momentarily speechless. How could he not see what he had done? How could he stand there so casually in the midst of such disrespect and destruction? No big deal. I finally managed. Jake, do you have any idea what you've done here? Do you have any concept of the damage you've caused? He shrugged. We got a little rowdy, but nothing that can't be fixed. Just call your cleaning lady or whatever. I held up the ruined photograph. This can't be fixed, Jake. This was our grandparents' wedding photo, the original. It's irreplaceable. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar defensiveness. How was I supposed to know that was important? You have so much stuff, Caitlin. You're acting like this is the end of the world, but for you, it's probably what? A drop in the bucket? A tax write-off? In that moment, I realized that my brother didn't see me as a person who had worked hard for everything she had. He saw me as a resource to be exploited, a safety net with no feelings. The revelation was as painful as it was clarifying. You need to leave, I said quietly. Now. And don't come back. As soon as Jake and the last of his friends had departed, I collapsed onto my ruined sofa and called my parents. My hands were still shaking with anger, but I was determined to remain calm and rational. Surely, once they understood the extent of the damage, they would be as horrified as I was. My mother answered on the third ring. Caitlin? How are you, sweetheart? Not good, Mom, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'm at the lake house. Did you know Jake was still here having a party? There was a pause. Well, he mentioned he might have a few friends over. Is everything okay? No, everything is not okay. The house is completely trashed. Jake had at least 30 people here. There's damage everywhere. Broken furniture, holes in the walls, stains, burns. My grandparents' wedding photo is ruined. Oh no, that's terrible. Let me get your father. I heard muffled conversation, then my father came on the line. Caitlin? What's this about Jake and a party? I repeated the situation, this time going into more detail about the specific damages. As I spoke, I could feel my composure slipping. The custom dining table is scratched beyond repair. Someone put cigarettes out on the deck railing. The hot tub is full of. I don't even want to know what. This isn't just a mess, Dad. This is thousands of dollars in damage. That's unacceptable, my father said, and for a moment I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone was acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Where is Jake now? I kicked him out. He and his friends left about 20 minutes ago. You kicked him out? Caitlin, it's getting dark. Where is he supposed to go? The relief evaporated instantly. Are you serious right now? After what he did to my home, you're worried about his accommodations. My mother's voice came back on the line. Honey, we understand you're upset. But Jake is probably just going through a phase. You know how young people can be. Mom, Jake is 29 years old. This isn't a phase, this is who he is. And the party wasn't just a few friends getting rowdy. This was deliberate disrespect for my property and for me. I'm sure he didn't mean any harm, she replied. Jake has always been a bit impulsive, but his heart is in the right place. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His heart? Mom, he destroyed my home and then told me I could afford to fix it so it doesn't matter. My father took the phone again. Now, Caitlin, let's not blow this out of proportion. Boys will be boys, after all. I'm sure it looks worse than it is in the moment. I have photos, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I'll send them to you right now. Then you can tell me if I'm blowing this out of proportion. I put them on speakerphone while I texted several of the damaged photos. There was silence as they received and presumably viewed the images. Well, my mother finally said, that is quite a mess. It's not a mess, Mom. It's vandalism. That seems a bit harsh, don't you think? My father interjected. It's not like he's a stranger who broke in. He's your brother. Which makes it worse. He should have respected my home precisely because he's my brother. Of course he should have, my mother agreed, but you know Jake has always been a free spirit. He doesn't think about consequences the way you do. And whose fault is that? I demanded. You've been making excuses for him his entire life. He's never had to face the consequences of his actions because you're always there to clean up his messes, literally and figuratively. That's not fair, Caitlin, my father said, a note of warning in his voice. We raised all our children the same way. No, you didn't. You raised me, Allison, and Todd to be responsible adults. But Jake? You've enabled his worst behavior since he was a teenager. That's enough, my father said sharply. I understand you're upset about the house, but there's no need to attack our parenting. I took a deep breath, trying to refocus the conversation. Look, the point is that Jake needs to pay for the damages. This is going to cost thousands to repair. There was a long pause before my mother spoke again. Sweetheart, you know Jake isn't in a position to pay for all that. He's between jobs right now, and he's trying to get back on his feet. He's been between jobs for most of his adult life, I pointed out. That doesn't absolve him of responsibility. No one is saying it does, my father countered. But let's be practical here. You're doing very well financially. This is unfortunate, but it's just stuff. Material things. You can easily afford to fix it, so why make such a fuss? I was stunned into momentary silence. Had my father really just suggested that because I was financially successful, my property didn't deserve the same respect as anyone else's? So, because I worked hard and built a good life for myself, I deserve less consideration than someone who hasn't? Is that what you're saying? Of course not, my mother jumped in. But family helps family, Caitlin. If you force Jake to pay for all this, it could ruin his chances of getting back on track. He's got those job interviews coming up, and he's really trying this time. He's really trying every time, Mom. And every time you and Dad bail him out, and nothing changes. You've become so materialistic, my father said with disappointment in his voice. When did money and possessions become more important to you than your own brother? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. This isn't about money or things. This is about respect. Jake didn't respect me enough to take care of my home after I did him a favor. And now, neither of you respect me enough to acknowledge that what he did was wrong and that he should be held accountable. We absolutely acknowledge that what he did was wrong, my mother insisted. No one is saying it wasn't. But pursuing this vindicatively isn't going to help anyone. Vindicatively? Expecting him to take responsibility for his actions is vindictive. You know what we mean, my father said. Making him pay for expensive repairs when you could easily cover it yourself is, well, it seems punitive rather than constructive. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. I don't think we're going to agree on this. I need to go now. I have to find a cleaning service that can come tonight. Caitlin, please, my mother began, but I cut her off. I'll call you tomorrow when I've had a chance to calm down. I ended the call and sat in the wreckage of my beautiful home, feeling more alone than I had in years. The people who should have been my strongest supporters had instead chosen to defend the indefensible. In their eyes, I was the villain for expecting basic respect and accountability. The realization was heartbreaking, but it was also clarifying. If my parents wouldn't hold Jake accountable, then I would have to do it myself. After the call with my parents, I sat alone in the damaged living room, surrounded by the aftermath of Jake's party. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled the house just hours before. In that quiet moment, memories from childhood flooded back. Jake at 10, breaking my science project the night before it was due, with no consequences beyond, he didn't mean it, Caitlin. Jake at 16, borrowing my first car without permission and returning it with an empty tank and a dented fender. He's just learning to drive, Caitlin. Don't be so hard on him. Jake at 21, borrowing money from my wallet during a family gathering to buy drugs, an incident my parents still referred to as a misunderstanding. Each time, I had forgiven him. Each time, I had believed that eventually he would grow up and change. But sitting among the destruction of my hard-earned sanctuary, I finally accepted the truth. Jake would never change as long as he never had to face real consequences. My reverie was interrupted by a knock at the door. The cleaning crew I'd frantically called had arrived, a 24-hour emergency service that specialized in post-party cleanups and property damage. Their eyes widened as they entered and surveyed the scene. "This is extensive," the lead cleaner, a woman named Patricia, said diplomatically. "We'll do what we can tonight, but some of this will require specialized services." "I understand," I replied. "Just do whatever you can to make it livable for now. I'll deal with the repairs later." For the next 3 hours, I moved from room to room with Patricia, cataloging the damage in detail. The list grew longer with each space we examined. Living room: stained sectional sofa, broken coffee table, cigarette burns on side tables, damaged bookshelf, torn curtains, wine stains on carpet. Kitchen: scorched countertops, cracked backsplash tiles, broken glassware, scratched hardwood floors, damaged refrigerator door, broken cabinet hinges. Bathrooms: clogged toilets, cracked sink in guest bath, missing shower curtain, water damage to vanity, broken mirror. Bedrooms: stained mattress in guest room, broken dresser drawer, damaged closet door, missing bedside lamp, perfume damaged dresser. Deck area: damaged hot tub cover, cigarette burns on railing, broken outdoor furniture, trampled landscaping, broken glass throughout. By midnight, the cleaning crew had done their best with the immediate issues, sanitizing the bathrooms, removing broken glass, cleaning the worst of the stains. But as Patricia had warned, much of the damage would require professional repairs. "I'd recommend having a proper damage assessment done," she advised before leaving. "Some of this might be covered by your homeowner's insurance." The next morning, I called my insurance company. They sent an adjuster named Mark who arrived by noon. He walked through the property with the same methodical approach I had used the night before, taking photographs and making notes on his tablet. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, he told me as we stood on the deck overlooking the lake. Started right after the housing crash when property damage claims went through the roof. I've seen a lot of destruction, but this is personal. This wasn't just a wild party. There's a vindictiveness to some of this damage. I thought about the broken photo of my grandparents, the scorched countertops, the hole in the hallway wall. My brother has issues, I said simply. Mark nodded sympathetically. The good news is that your policy will cover some of this. The bad news is that there's a $5,000 deductible and certain items, particularly the custom pieces and personal belongings, have limited coverage. He tapped on his tablet for a few minutes, then looked up. Based on my preliminary assessment, you're looking at approximately $15,000 to $18,000 in total damages. After your deductible and coverage limits, you'll probably be out of pocket for about $8,000 to $10,000. The figure didn't surprise me. I'd been mentally calculating costs all morning, but hearing it stated so plainly made the reality of the situation impossible to ignore. There's something else you should know, Mark added. If you file this claim, your premiums will likely increase. And since the damage was caused by a family member who had permission to be on the property, some companies might even consider dropping your coverage at renewal. So I'm being punished for my brother's actions? He shrugged apologetically. Insurance companies don't really care about family dynamics. They just see risk factors. A claim this size raises red flags. After Mark left, I called a contractor I'd worked with on several of my rental properties. Carlos arrived that afternoon and gave me more detailed estimates for the repairs. Some items, like the custom dining table and bookshelf, couldn't be repaired. They would need to be completely replaced. The handcrafted items would take weeks, possibly months, to recreate. This countertop is specialty quartz, Carlos pointed out in the kitchen. We'll have to replace the entire slab. You can't just patch these burn marks. As we moved through the house, I found myself growing increasingly emotional about certain items. The damaged dresser in my bedroom had belonged to my grandmother. The now-stained rug in the living room had been my first luxury purchase after my business became profitable. Each item represented not just its monetary value, but a piece of my journey. The furniture companies can probably rush some of the replacement pieces, Carlos said as he completed his assessment. But realistically, you're looking at a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks before everything is back to normal. 6 to 8 weeks. 2 months of my sanctuary being disrupted because of one night of my brother's irresponsibility. That evening, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the lake. The beauty of the view stood in stark contrast to the chaos behind me. In that peaceful moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt and anger didn't disappear, but they crystallized into clarity and determination. This pattern with Jake wasn't going to stop unless someone stopped it. My parents had made it abundantly clear that they wouldn't be that someone, which meant it had to be me. I wouldn't yell or plead or try to make Jake understand the impact of his actions. Those approaches had failed for years. Instead, I would do what I did best in my professional life. I would be strategic, methodical, and firm. Jake had destroyed my property. He would pay for the damages, one way or another. And more importantly, this would never happen again. Not to my lake house, not to any property I owned, and not to me. With newfound resolve, I pulled out my laptop and began to draft a plan. The morning after my decision, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since closing on the lake house. Instead of letting anger consume me, I channeled it into methodical action. First, I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every single item that had been damaged, categorizing them by room, severity, and estimated repair or replacement cost. I attached the photos I'd taken, along with the assessments from the insurance adjuster and contractor. Next, I called my friend Amanda, who happened to be an attorney specializing in property law. We'd met at a real estate networking event years ago and had maintained both a professional relationship and personal friendship. "This is beyond unacceptable," Amanda said after I explained the situation. "You have every right to pursue this legally if that's the route you want to take." "I'm hoping it won't come to that," I replied. I don't want to sue my brother, but I do want him to face real consequences for once. What did you have in mind? She asked. I want to create a formal invoice for the damages and present it to my parents and Jake. And I want to draft some kind of agreement for any future family use of my properties. Amanda nodded thoughtfully. A family property usage agreement. I've actually drafted similar documents for clients with vacation homes. It's essentially a contract that outlines rules, responsibilities, and consequences for violating the agreement. Exactly, I said. I want it to be clear and legally binding. I can help you with that, she offered. But Caitlin, you should be prepared for pushback. Family dynamics get complicated when legal documents enter the picture. They're already complicated, I replied grimly. At least this way, the expectations will be clear. For the next few days, Amanda and I worked together to create 2 documents. The first was a formal invoice detailing all the damages, with corresponding photos and cost estimates. The total came to $17,235.47. The second was a comprehensive family property usage agreement that outlined specific rules for staying at any of my properties, a security deposit requirement, and an acknowledgement of financial responsibility for any damages. While Amanda worked on finalizing the legal language of the documents, I focused on securing my property. I called a security company and had cameras installed throughout the house and property. I changed the locks and had a new, more sophisticated alarm system put in. I even changed the code on the gate at the end of the driveway. Physical security was important, but emotional boundaries were equally crucial. I spent several evenings drafting and redrafting a letter to my parents explaining my position. I wanted to be firm without being cruel, clear without being condescending. After several attempts, I finally had a version I was comfortable with. Dear Mom and Dad, asterisk. I've taken some time to process what happened at the lake house and our conversation afterward. I want to be clear about where I stand and what happens next, asterisk. The attached document details the full extent of the damage Jake caused, along with repair and replacement costs. The total comes to $17,235.47. This is not an arbitrary number. It represents real costs I will incur to restore my property to its previous condition. Asterisk. I understand your instinct to protect Jake. As parents, that's natural. But in doing so for his entire life, you've prevented him from developing the skills and responsibility he needs to function as an adult. At 29, he should be capable of respecting other people's property and accepting the consequences when he fails to do so. Asterisk. I've worked hard for everything I have. The fact that I've been financially successful doesn't mean my property deserves less respect or that I should absorb the costs of Jake's destruction. Would you expect a stranger to pay for Jake's damages simply because they could afford it? I hope not. Asterisk. I'm also attaching a family property usage agreement that I've had drawn up with the help of a lawyer friend. Moving forward, anyone who wishes to use my properties, including the lake house and my city condo, will need to sign this agreement and provide a security deposit. This applies to everyone, not just Jake. Asterisk. This isn't about punishment or being vindictive. It's about establishing healthy boundaries and expectations. I value our family relationships, but they must be based on mutual respect. Asterisk. I love you both, and I hope we can move forward from this in a way that strengthens rather than damages our family bonds. But that can only happen if we all acknowledge the reality of the situation and take appropriate steps to address it. Asterisk. Love. Asterisk. Caitlin. Asterisk. After a week of preparation, I had everything ready. The detailed invoice, the property agreement, my letter, and digital copies of all the photos documenting the damage. I decided not to contact Jake directly. Given our last interaction and his dismissive attitude, I doubted he would take me seriously. Instead, I would start with my parents, who at least had a vested interest in maintaining our relationship. I sent the email with all attachments on a Sunday evening when I knew they would both be home and have time to review the materials thoroughly. Then I waited. Their initial response came within hours, a brief email saying they had received my message and would need some time to process this information. They promised to call me in a few days after they'd had a chance to review everything carefully. True to their word, they didn't try to call immediately with an emotional reaction. I appreciated this restraint, taking it as a sign that they were at least considering my position seriously. Meanwhile, I didn't hear anything from Jake, which suggested they hadn't immediately forwarded the materials to him. This, too, seemed like a positive sign. 3 days after sending the email, I received a text from my mother. "We've reviewed everything. Can we talk tomorrow evening?" I replied with a simple yes and felt a curious mix of apprehension and empowerment. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had set a clear boundary with my family and was prepared to enforce it, regardless of their reaction. Whatever happened next, I knew I had taken control of the situation in a way that honored my own needs and values. The ball was now in their court. My phone rang precisely at 7 p.m. the following evening. Taking a deep breath, I answered and put it on speaker. "Caitlin." My mother's voice sounded strained. "Your father and I are both here." "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad." "We've gone through all the materials you sent," my father began, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. "I have to say we were surprised by the extent of the damage. The photos really brought home what you were trying to tell us." "It's worse in person," I replied simply. "We believe you," my mother said quickly. "And we understand why you're upset. But Caitlin, this amount, over $17,000. That's a substantial sum." "It is," I agreed. "And that's a conservative estimate. Some things, like my grandparents' wedding photo, are irreplaceable." There was a pause before my father spoke again. "We've been thinking about this situation a lot. We understand that Jake needs to take responsibility. But isn't there some way to, I don't know, work out a payment plan or reduce the amount somehow?" "The amount isn't arbitrary, Dad. It's the actual cost of the repairs and replacements. If anything, it's on the low end because I didn't include my time or the inconvenience of not being able to use the property for weeks." "We understand that," my mother interjected. "But Jake simply doesn't have that kind of money. Even with a payment plan, it would take him years to pay it off." "That's not my problem," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "His financial situation doesn't change the fact that he caused significant damage to my property. Actions have consequences." "But this could ruin him financially before he even gets started," my father argued, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. "He's got those job interviews coming up. If he's saddled with this kind of debt—" "Wait," I interrupted. "Are you suggesting that Jake shouldn't have to pay for damages he caused because it might interfere with his future plans?" "Do you realize how that sounds?" "Of course he should pay something," my mother said quickly. "We're just asking if there's room for compassion here." "I've shown Jake nothing but compassion for years," I pointed out. "I let him use my home as a favor to you. He repaid that compassion by destroying my property and then telling me I could afford to fix it so it doesn't matter. Where was his compassion?" Neither of them had an immediate response to that. "Look," I continued, softening my tone slightly. "I'm not trying to be vindictive, but this is a pattern that's gone on for Jake's entire adult life. He does something irresponsible, faces no real consequences, and then does it again. Nothing changes because nothing has to change." "So this is about teaching Jake a lesson?" my father asked, sounding defensive again. "It's about holding him accountable, like any other adult would be," I corrected. "If he had trashed a hotel room like this, they would have charged his credit card and possibly pursued legal action. Why should it be different because the property belongs to his sister?" There was another long pause. I could hear my parents murmuring to each other, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. Finally, my mother spoke. What if we paid for the damages?" The offer surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. You would pay over $17,000 to shield Jake from the consequences of his actions? We could split it, my father suggested. Maybe you cover a third, we cover a third, and Jake covers a third. That seems fair. Fair. I repeated incredulously. How is it fair that I pay for any of the damage Jake caused? I'm already losing the use of my property for weeks. I'm already dealing with the stress and inconvenience of managing all these repairs. We're just trying to find a compromise, my mother said, sounding tired. There is a compromise, I replied. I'm not pursuing legal action, which I would be fully justified in doing. I'm not cutting Jake out of my life entirely, which many people would understand if I did. I'm simply asking that he take full financial responsibility for the damage he caused. And if he can't pay it, my father challenged. Then you have a choice to make, I said firmly. You can either let him face the consequences of a legal judgment against him, or you can pay it yourselves. But I will not be covering any portion of these costs. I could almost feel the shock radiating through the phone. My parents had never heard me take such a hard line before. And there's something else, I continued before they could respond. The property usage agreement isn't negotiable. Moving forward, anyone who wants to use my properties will need to sign it and provide a security deposit. No exceptions. Even for us? My mother asked, sounding hurt. We would never damage your home, Caitlin. It's not about trust, Mom. It's about establishing clear expectations and boundaries. This applies to everyone equally. This feels very cold, my father said after a moment. Very transactional. We're family, not tenants. And families should respect each other's boundaries and property, I countered. If everyone had respected my home in the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The call continued for another 20 minutes, with my parents cycling through various attempts to negotiate, guilt trip, and reason with me. But I remained firm. By the end, we had reached an uneasy resolution. My parents would cover the cost of the damages and work out repayment with Jake privately. They reluctantly agreed to the property usage agreement for any future visits, though they made it clear they weren't happy about it. As we were about to hang up, my father asked, "Have you spoken to Jake about any of this?" "No," I replied honestly. I didn't think he would take me seriously. "Well, he knows now," my mother said. "We discussed it with him before calling you. He's upset." Almost on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Jake. Asterisk way to turn mom and dad against me. Always have to be the perfect one, don't you? Asterisk. I ignored it. I'm sure he is upset. But being upset doesn't change the reality of what happened. After we ended the call, I felt emotionally drained but also oddly liberated. For the first time, I had stood my ground completely without backing down or compromising my values to keep the peace. Over the next few days, the fallout continued. Jake sent several more angry texts before apparently giving up when I didn't respond. My sister Allison called to express her support, saying she'd witnessed Jake's irresponsibility firsthand for years and thought it was about time someone stood up to him. My brother Todd remained neutral, texting only to ask if I was okay and offering to help with repairs if needed. Extended family members began to weigh in as the news spread. My Aunt Patricia called to tell me I was being harsh and that family should forgive each other. My cousin Ryan, on the other hand, sent an email applauding me for finally setting boundaries with Jake. The most surprising reaction came from my Uncle Frank, my father's brother, who had always been close to Jake. He called one evening about a week after my conversation with my parents. "Your father told me what happened," he began without preamble. "I wanted you to know I think you're doing the right thing." "You do?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Look, I love Jake. He's a good kid at heart. But he's never had to grow up because everyone's always protected him from consequences. What you're doing isn't easy, but it's necessary." His support meant more than I could express, especially coming from someone I had expected to take Jake's side. 3 weeks after the initial incident, my parents transferred the full amount for the damages to my account. They didn't mention whether Jake had agreed to repay them or how that arrangement would work. I decided not to ask. That was between them. The repairs began in earnest. Some items were relatively quick to fix, like the hole in the wall and the scorched countertops. Others, like the custom furniture pieces, would take months to replace. But slowly, my sanctuary began to take shape again. Throughout this process, I maintained minimal contact with Jake, responding to his occasional messages with brief, neutral replies. He never apologized directly, though in one text he did acknowledge that things got out of hand and he should have been more careful. It wasn't the accountability I had hoped for, but it was something. 3 months after the incident that had turned my family upside down, I returned to my Lake Tahoe home for a long weekend. The major repairs had been completed, though some of the custom pieces were still being crafted. The house felt different, not just because of the new furniture and fixtures, but because of what had transpired there. This space that had once represented only achievement and peace now also carried memories of betrayal and conflict. Yet as I sat on the newly restored deck watching the sunset over the lake, I realized the experience had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Setting and maintaining boundaries with my family had been painful but necessary. And while the relationships remained somewhat strained, there were unexpected positive developments as well. The most surprising change had come from Jake. According to my sister Allison, who still spoke with him regularly, he had actually secured one of the jobs he'd interviewed for in Tahoe, an entry-level position at a local resort. More surprisingly, he had kept it for over 2 months now, showing up on time and earning positive feedback from his supervisors. My mother had mentioned during our last brief phone call that Jake was making regular payments to them for the damages, though she hadn't offered details and I hadn't asked. I didn't know if this newfound responsibility would last, but it was more progress than he'd shown in years. My relationship with my parents had shifted too. Our conversations were less frequent and somewhat formal, but there was also a new undercurrent of respect in their tone. They had signed the property usage agreement without further argument and had even asked permission before suggesting a family gathering at the lake house for Thanksgiving, something they would have simply assumed was fine in the past. That upcoming Thanksgiving gathering would be the first time all of us would be together since the incident. I had agreed to host, partly as an olive branch and partly to test the new boundaries I'd established. Jake would be attending, along with my other siblings and their families. In preparation, I had printed copies of the property usage agreement for everyone to sign upon arrival. I had also installed a discreet lockbox on the boat dock where guests would deposit their security deposit before receiving a key. It felt strange to implement such formal procedures with my own family, but also necessary. The week before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected email from Jake. It was brief but significant. Caitlin, *. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened at your place. Not just the damage, but how I acted when you confronted me about it. It wasn't cool. *. I know I've been a pain in the ass for years. Working regularly and paying mom and dad back has made me realize how much they've covered for me all this time. And how much of their help I've wasted. *. Anyway, I signed your agreement, and I'm bringing my security deposit to Thanksgiving. Thanks for still being willing to have me there. *. Jake *. It wasn't an elaborate apology, but coming from Jake, it felt sincere. I replied with a simple acknowledgement, and thank you, careful not to make too much of this tentative step toward maturity. The Thanksgiving gathering itself was initially awkward, with everyone a bit on edge, waiting to see how Jake and I would interact. But as the day progressed, the tension gradually eased. Jake was subdued but respectful, even helping with dishes without being asked, a first in family memory. After dinner, my father pulled me aside while everyone else was engaged in a board game in the living room. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Your mother and we didn't give you the support you deserved. We've always been so focused on helping the child who seemed to need it most that we sometimes took your strength for granted. I understand, Dad, I replied, surprised by his candor. Jake needed more attention growing up. I never resented that. But we should have held him to the same standards we held you to, he continued. We thought we were helping him, but we were actually making it harder for him to grow up. What you did, it was a wake-up call for all of us. His acknowledgement meant more to me than I could express. We rejoined the others, and for the first time in months, I felt like we might actually emerge from this situation as a stronger family. In the months that followed, I applied the lessons I'd learned about boundaries to other areas of my life. I created clearer expectations with tenants in my rental properties. I became more direct about my needs and limits in friendships and dating relationships. I even established better work-life boundaries, something I'd struggled with for years. The renovation of my lake house continued, with each improvement reflecting not just my personal taste, but also the growth I'd experienced. I added security features, yes, but also elements that made the space more comfortable for family gatherings, a testament to my hope for ongoing healing in our relationships. Jake maintained his job at the resort and eventually moved into his own apartment in Tahoe. Our relationship remained a work in progress, with occasional setbacks but a general trend toward improvement. The property usage agreement remained in place for everyone, serving as a concrete reminder of the new family dynamic. Looking back now, I recognize that standing up for myself was ultimately an act of love, not just for me, but for my entire family. By refusing to participate in the dysfunctional patterns that had defined us for years, I created space for everyone to grow and change. The path hasn't been easy, and there are still difficult moments. But as I sit here in my restored sanctuary, watching the lake shimmer in the morning light, I know that the boundaries I set were worth the temporary discomfort they caused. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for the people in our lives is to hold them accountable and trust that they have the capacity to rise to the occasion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you handle it, and what was the outcome? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. And if you found this story helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about navigating complicated family dynamics, and share this video with someone who might be struggling with similar issues. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own family journey.